You're listening to the Beat It with Joe podcast. The show is about mental health for athletes and coaches. This podcast is for athletes, up-and-coming athletes, and all their support staff, and all those that are passionate about player wellness. As a Gallup strengths coach, therapist, and mindfulness coach, I interview professional athletes, coaches, and those who are working with them. I believe that mental health is vital for performance. On the Player Wellness Program, I assist individuals discover their mental strengths using the Clifton Strengths Assessment. Setting goals doesn't just happen at the start of the program, and achieving goals doesn't just happen because they were set. We work on their objectives and reassess them as circumstances occur. I introduce them to skills such as meditation, breathing, and yoga to help manage performance anxiety, stress, pressure, motivation, expectations, and life on tour or in competition. I also offer therapy when they feel they need it. Subscribe now to stay connected. Today I'll be speaking to Martin Fairn from Gazing Red2Blue. The Gazing Red2Blue approach uses simple coaching models to unlock peak performance under pressure, allowing athletes and coaches to enhance their mindset to achieve their best. Martin has been with Gazing from the beginning, and as a co-founder has combined his knowledge gained from many different corporate roles, primarily at Xerox, to develop Gazing's unique approach of equipping individuals and teams to perform well under pressure. Martin's role centers around facilitating executive coaching and senior team development programs, focused on helping leaders develop and sustain an organization to deliver consistently, improving performance in high-pressure environments. This work includes conference and seminar work, as well as traditional training programs. Alongside his professional role, Martin has enjoyed a successful rugby union career playing for Coventry, and he was also selected for England's student team. Welcome, Martin, and thank you for joining my podcast. So my first question to you, Martin, is how does Red2Blue help when working with individual athletes?
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Joe. Well, thanks first of all for the invitation and the invitation to join your podcast, and welcome to anyone joining us. So it's great you're asking the question about Red2Blue. It's obviously a framework that we've been some years in developing now, and it focuses on mindset and what we're calling mental skills. So how does it help athletes? Introducing it specifically to athletes, because it's actually designed for humans in general, but specifically for athletes. When you sit down with an athlete and start talking to them about their performance, which is, I find, an easier entry to a discussion necessarily than mentality, and you sort of break their performance down into a number of segments. Of course, athletes quickly, and coaches the same, recognize physical, they recognize technical, they always recognize the tactical decision making. And the fourth aspect of what contributes to their ability to do well is their mentality. But most of the time, my experience is they've either done nothing about it, or it's been treated as something that they'll only look at if it's a problem. And what we have done with Red2Blue is created it in a simple, accessible way to make it a skill, come across as a skill, presented as a skill that they can actually learn about and practice to get better at. So it helps them by developing their mental skills alongside the other aspects of what they need to develop to get better.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. I think mental strengths and mental health has been like a little bit forgotten about, or is only addressed if there's a problem. Whereas my understanding of Red2Blue is very much about looking at what the athlete can control and what they can do, and looking at their strengths and abilities rather than focusing on what they can't do.
Yeah, look, it's brilliant, and it's one of the. I mean, sometimes people will say to us, some coaches, some athletes, some people in business and in schools will say, this stuff's just common sense. Because the art of Red2Blue is to sort of say, well, look, you need to focus on what helps, focus your attention on the task that matters, and not get distracted by stuff that you either can't control, or something that's already happened, or something that might happen in the future. It's obvious common sense to talk about. The problem is doing it when it matters is the challenge. And if you overlay the challenge that athletes are used to face is doing it when they're under pressure. Then the question is, how do they do it when it really matters? How do they make sure they keep their attention on what matters and don't get distracted? And that recognition of what they can't control is one of the first most helpful pieces of work we do with athletes.
Yeah. And I think the reason and the way that I got introduced to you was through Adri Brownlee, who is a climber, and she is operating in high risk, high pressure, life-threatening scenarios when climbing the mountains. And when I asked her about Red2Blue and I asked her how it worked for her, she explained that you taught her how to focus on one thing. So when the avalanches are coming down, she described it as an aircraft, like an aircraft 747 coming rushing down the mountain. Instead of being paralyzed by the fear and the what could happen, you gave her the skills to focus on one thing, and she said she focused on her shoes.
Yeah. It's, I mean, look, you and I have spoken already. Mountaineers and people who choose to do it are making an interesting personal choice in the first place, because they're putting themselves into an extraordinarily difficult, challenging, and potentially dangerous situation. So already the notion of pressure that manifests most of us on a day-to-day basis, for them, it's extraordinarily high because of the nature of the potential. But still, the mentality and the need to make sure that you are thinking as clearly as possible in those difficult situations is fundamentally helpful. So working with Adri, and she talks about it, using it with her team, using Red2Blue as a way of just resetting, refocusing your attention on the situation that she's in, the next step, the next decision, and then being able to sort of zoom out a little bit and take a broader look at the decision she might need to make, rather than get distracted by the consequences of what might happen and the potential danger with that.
Yeah. Okay. When you talk about a team, let's try and think of an example of maybe a sports team that you may have worked with.
Yeah.
Can you give an example on how they would benefit through using the Red2Blue thinking, training? And before I get into that, I just wanted to also mention, like you spoke about skills training and physical training and all that training, it's about practicing.
Yes, it is.
It's about practicing over and over again. And what you were saying about resetting and knowing what the next step is, that's about practicing the mind steps in order for in the critical situations that it's clear, crystal clear.
I completely agree. We're lucky enough now, Joe, to work with Adri as a mountaineer. We're working with footballers who are pursuing a professional career, with rugby players, with golfers, with rowers, with swimmers, with tennis players, with shooters in the Olympics, and all of them, particularly the young ones, but all of them generally, are challenged by the same thing, which is, whilst you understand the concept of focusing on what matters and not getting distracted by stuff you can't control, acknowledging that and being able to reset is difficult, which is why it's helpful to view it as a skill. And so I guess a good analogy would be to think of skiing. As people learn to ski, they first of all ski down a relatively easy slope, and it's quite comfortable to do, but you've still got to learn how to do it. But as you want to ski down higher, more challenging slopes, you've got to get better at skiing, and you've got to practice it, and you've got to learn, and you've got to be coached and all those things. That's the same with mental skill. You've got to put yourselves in different situations. You've got to challenge yourself with different scenarios, and you've got to come up with ways of practicing what you just said, which is that recognizing when you're diverted, accepting the fact that it's your emotions reacting to a typical situation, letting those go, and then in resetting your focus at what matters in this moment in time. Sounds terribly easy to say, but much more difficult when it matters. And so that concept is the skill they learn. Yeah.
And the higher the pressure, the higher the pressure, the higher the chances of unraveling. You know, if I just think of working with golfers, and I know how, you know, if they don't make that putt, it means if they don't make the putt, they don't make the cut. If they don't make the cut, they don't earn. So the higher the pressure, and if they have those basic mindset skills that they can just reset and focus in that moment, that's crystal and it's been repeated several times, there's a chance there's more success.
Completely. And in individual sports like shooting, like tennis, like golf, Like many of those sports where there's an individual moment, just learning that mental skill and those critical moments, 18th green on a Sunday afternoon when there's X million rand for up to grabs, that 10-foot putt that you putt 99 times out of 100 takes on a different feeling. And acknowledging, preparing your mental steps for that, not just the putting technique, will be an important part of preparing to be able to apply your mentality in the most helpful way. But you asked a question about how do you engage groups and teams, and that's another level with this, because it actually opens the door to mindset for coaches and for players in teams in a way that it's never been done before. Because rather than being sent to see, I'm going to put inverted commas, the doctor, in a way that says there's something wrong that you need to fix, now mindset is introduced in a way that says this is a common framework and a common language and a common simple, I mean, I've got it here, there you go, a common simple way of understanding what's going on in our heads, the impact of us individually, collectively of pressure, unhelpfully how we might react, and how we can build an individual and collective mentality to make sure we stay on task. And probably the best known team that uses it and has used it for 10 years is the New Zealand All Blacks. And they've won 2 World Cups, so it's been successful for them. They didn't win the last one. But of course, in a competitive sport like rugby, you won't always guarantee success. And we did some great work with Namibia on the same continent, just up the road from you. And they, for a half a game against New Zealand in the Japan World Cup, had an unbelievable mentality of staying on task and staying in the game, which is no mean feat when you're a developing nation like Namibia. And that was just in rugby.
Yeah, and I think, Martin, we talk the same language in the sense of I use Clifton strengths. So you're looking at people's strengths, and by doing their strengths and doing what you do, is that individuals understand how they can be the best version of themselves.
Yes.
When they've got that vocabulary, they can describe to their teammates how they can be the best versions of themselves and how their teammates can help them be the best versions of themselves, and vice versa. So you've got a winning formula if everybody knows what steps they need to take in order for the best outcome. Yeah. And I think we've spoken about this before. If the coach knows that this is how I can get the best out of this player, so much time is saved and communication is clearer, right? So when coaching the individual, they've got a better vocab, and then when coaching the team, they can join those links in a far more natural flow way. And also, it's understanding not everybody's good at everything. And you're not trying to make their weaknesses better. You're just trying to put all that you have successfully together. Yeah.
Joe, I agree. And actually, the conversations we have had about the work you do on mental strengths combined with Red, I think will work well, because the framework actually provides that route into, because starting to investigate and really understand your own mentality, where you're strong, where you may have some gaps, and where that can be covered by teammates. That's a real insight into mentality that doesn't feel like there's something wrong that you got to fix. It feels like it's an area that you've got to develop, and it is accessible to coaches. That's why a lot of the work that we're doing with Gazing Red2Blue actually is to work directly with the coaches. So even though we know that we have a role to play in supporting the athletes, individuals or group, we also know it's critical for us that we are working to introduce Red2Blue to the coaches. And by the way, coaching from the blue side is far easier to do than coaching from the red side. And how many coaches do we know who've found themselves under pressure and really struggling to react mentally in a helpful and useful way for themselves as coaches?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention that coaches are human after all, with their own set of emotions and external pressures. Yeah. So if their mental health is accurate and clear and supported, and they've got a support system around them, they can be the best version of themselves, and in turn the team will benefit hugely. My feeling is that coaches are not supported, and they're the kind of forgotten people in the mental training or whatever. So I just think it's important that they know that there is help available, and this type of thing would be hugely beneficial to them.
Yeah, Joe, I agree. I mean, we've found one of the things that we've designed and continue to try to work to make better is that Red2Blue has to be, first of all, it has to be accessible. So although we're unpicking what is potentially complex, and there are some neuroscientists who've really looked hard at what we do, and there's lots of good neuroscience to support the notion of red to blue thinking and things like that. But do you need to know it as an athlete or a coach? It needs to be accessible, which is what red to blue is. The next thing is it needs to be practical for a coach, for an athlete, for one of the support team. How do I use it in the moment? And then what can I do because I'm pursuing an elite performance level? What can I do to prepare and review? But the first application for us in our experience has to be, we have to use it in the moment. People have to use it when they need it, when the pressure's on.
Yeah. And I think that's what made it attractive for me when I heard about it, was working with golfers. I can give them all the skills of the therapy and the Clifton Strengths and the breathing and the meditation and all of that I do to help them. But in the moment, like when there's that pressure situation, what can they do? And I just think this Red to Blue is something that is just, it's clearer, it's concise, it's simple, and they can translate it into a practical outcome. So I love that. I want to ask you, what brings you the most joy when working with high performance people? Like my vibe is athletes, but with you, it's broader than that, it's corporate. What brings you the most joy?
Look, the biggest thing for me is people being able to pick Red2Blue up and make it and say, this has made a difference to me. And athletes are a great place to start very often because they've got a reason for starting to learn about mentality. And I had a lovely piece of feedback in a corporate session we did from a young lady the other day who she had played professional football for a number of years, played twice for England, played twice for England in World Cups in the early years of women's football. And I didn't know that was what she'd done. She just said to me at the end of the session, we did a 2-hour introduction and they did some work. She said, for the first time, I've had mentality introduced to me in a way that I understood what's been going on with me and at those moments. And I wish we'd known about this when I started my playing career. And when you get that sort of feedback, that's a genuinely big moment. Now, I'd like to get earlier. So my other great joy is taking it to young kids. And in just up the road from you, in Soweto, we did a fantastic session with the rugby club in Soweto where we just got everybody sitting under a tree for about 2 hours, all the players, and we just introduced Red2Blue, and they all walked away with a map. And these were kids from 6 or 7 years old up to the age of people playing. And we've done the same in Kenya, connected to the work we did to the army. And I don't know those people, and I don't know how much of an impact. I just know they've now got coaches who use it and apply it. But just those moments where people take the map and they go, I can use this, I can understand what's happening, I can try and get a sense of what to do to make sure I spend my time more blue than red when I'm playing, whatever it is I'm playing. Those are terrific moments.
But you said you don't know how much of an impact it's had. If my thinking is, if you can change one person's thinking, you can change a community, even if it's a small community. And that's a gift that you've given those people, which is unbelievable. Another one, I don't know if you have a peak performance or a peak coaching experience or something like a real highlight in your coaching career, if you had one that you want to share. Or
well, listen, I mean, the Your Black story is a great one because they will speak about the role that mentality played in helping them win 2 World Cups. So that's pretty cool. But also moments when you individually support a driver, and Alice has spoken about this recently, so I'm okay. Alice Powell is a driver. She was competing in the women's series this year, and had really struggled at the beginning. Miami had ended up with a crash and then a not great result. Hadn't gone well for the first 2, and to the point that, and she said this, she sort of pretty much felt like, I don't want to race anymore. And we just did some work, and she did some work. The important thing about Red2Blue is she did some work to just reset, get started again, understand the fact that the past is one of those things that sits in the can't control circles, got herself reset, did some work, understood and accepted how she felt, and then sat in the car in Budapest and won the Grand Prix.
Yeah,
the women's fantastic. Grand Prix. And really did speak to her mentality as being a major factor. Look, she's a fast driver. She was one of the favourites anyway, but you know, being a fast driver and being a favourite doesn't mean you win anything like a race at that level. So that was a really great moment to feel like she'd done some work to help her.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I mean, I think as a coach and a therapist, you realize, well, you know that the person, the individuals you're coaching, they are an expert of their own lives. So it's just about helping them discover their strengths, their expertise.
You know, Joe, yeah, Joe, that's a really good thought. Actually, I believe what we do, and I actually believe, and you, I know you do the same. We're empowering athletes to take control, regain control of their mentality. So actually, rather than using you, me, or anybody, or any concept as a crutch to lean on, actually providing them with the understanding and the tools to help become more mentally skillful, in our case, using Red2Blue, linked in with the work you do around building your mental strengths and being more aware of those. That's them taking control of their own mentality and helping them build the capacity to be able to apply it in the best and most effective way when it matters. That's what you want. And I mean, there's a young 14-year-old footballer who's just been selected 2 years up to play for her country, for England. And she's been doing Red2Blue for 3 years now. And she's just really understood that this will have an impact on how well she's able to play at the top level of football. And when you give them that power, you know, it's a great privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think the young people, there's that energy, there's that passion, there's that want, and as soon as there's that want, they're like a sponge, and they want to take it all in, which brings up another question of what challenges do you think these people are facing today? I mean, I had a discussion with some golfers this morning. They just about to go touring, and I'm talking about the vulnerability of women traveling overseas for the first time, and how they can be sitting ducks with sponsors, and how people can take advantage of them, and so as a coach, it's preparing these ladies for setting boundaries and knowing what their enough is, and all that type of thing. But just saying that's one thing. What other challenges do you think the youth are facing today? And we look at emotional, physical, financial, social, all of that type of thing. Yeah,
I think it's a really important, what we touched on this a bit when we first spoke, it's a really important reflection of the work that in our case, the Red2Blue coaches will do and that people can do, is to acknowledge the fact as a human being that it isn't just about the court or the pitch or the course that will reflect the impact on your mentality. And in fact, as you reach the elite level, tennis, golf, that involves an awful lot of impact on your life and the way you live. And it's really important to build your mentality to cope with the relationships and the things that sit around your own life, and who you spend time with and how you do that. And of course, the other aspects of your life as well as focusing on the sport itself. Because if you don't, that's going to make it difficult. And the logistics involved with elite golf, tennis, any of those ones where you travel around the world, need to be prepared for that mentally, because otherwise it'll leak into your ability to do what you want to do on the court, on the course.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, in my experience, it's also learning when to dial when it's appropriate to be in a certain mindset and when it's not. And so it might be absolutely appropriate to be highly competitive on the tennis court, on the golf course, wherever it can be, but it's not very user-friendly in a family setting or in a relationship or with your friends. If you and I are going to compete against those, it's going to be destructive. So again, it's the self-awareness to understand when it's appropriate and when to dial it down. And that comes with coaching and maturity. And yeah.
I really like that, because in a way, Joe, you're talking about choosing your mindset and you're talking about selecting where you put your attention, but also the level of emotional intensity and the motivational factors that come into it, and that natural instinct to compete. And we use a concept, greatest strength, greatest weakness, to help athletes understand that. Because as you go through the as you arrive at the elite performance levels, the pressure increases, the expectations increase, the environment that you're working in, the competitiveness of it, and actually being ready for that, preparing yourself, using the tools to get ready for it, and acknowledging that that's appropriate mentality for that moment. But then knowing in the other factors of your life, there's other elements of your life that you need to make sure are, not impacted unhelpfully.
Totally. Because if we look at social media today, and these people are open to criticism, and as a high performance personality type, it would be sometimes difficult to accept. I mean, it's difficult enough to get constructive criticism in order to improve, but a lot is not constructive criticism. So again, it's the skills to keeping it simple, and to zoom in or zoom out where appropriate, as you call it, zoom in and zoom out. I mean, I think all those, as things are evolving and different challenges are entering these people's worlds, it's just keeping it simple at the end of the day.
It is for those athletes, isn't it? And one of the things that we started some work in a schools program recently, and had a similar conversation about the impact that unhelpful feedback and stuff that goes on. One of the major lessons that we try and teach in Red2Blue is the importance of acknowledging how you feel about something that you find uncomfortable. So rather than fighting it and resisting it, or being told don't feel like that or don't react like that, it's so important for us as human beings just to acknowledge that feeling early on, because once you do that, it allows you to take control of when you let it go. And that's critical for athletes, of course, but it's just important for everybody to be able to do that. And we sort of eventually we learn how to do that. But if you can build a skill around it, then we're talking at early age with some of the children now. Just give them a simple way of doing it. As you say, keep it simple.
Yeah, I love it. It's acknowledging the feeling, maybe giving a word to the feeling, and then releasing it so that it doesn't clog your mental space when you're needing performance mentality and focus. Yeah.
And importantly, even if the feeling's been caused by something that you can't control, either an activity that you participated in that didn't go well, which is in the past, or something else that's gone on in the wider environment, the critical thing to acknowledge is you can't control what happened, but you can now control at what point you let go of how the feeling, how it's making you feel. But you got to acknowledge that. That can be done quickly when it needs to be, or can take a little bit of time. But once you are empowered with the choice, that's an important thing for athletes, because then you can move and as you say, clear your space, clear your mind to make better decisions about what to do next.
Yeah, I love that. Like I worked in addiction for a while, and I used to use and I still use it, as your head as a parking lot. And when your mind is full of cars, lorries, and motorbikes, there's no space for anything else. So it's being able to empty the parking lot of the little things and then the big things, which opens up space for positive, clearer thinking, and performance thinking in what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're right. I mean, we know we've spoken about we're working both ends of the mindset rather than separate mentality. Just think of it as a continuum. And at one end of it, you've got all of the quite appropriate, quite very real needs for mental health and mental health support, and links to addiction are some of those things that will drive out that requirement. If you keep chugging along that continuum, you'll eventually get to the desire to do well, the mindset needed to do well, and eventually you get to those people who have the talent and the capability and the desire to do well at whatever sport or activity it is, and being able to think clearly at those critical moments and clear your mind enough so that you're informed with the information you need and you can apply the skills you need at those core moments. It's worth its weight in gold. But it sounds so easy to say, but so often you see at critical moments that people aren't able to do that.
Yeah, and it's practice.
I agree.
Yep. And repeat. Absolutely. Okay, but thank you so much for your time. And thank you for your incredible knowledge. And I will leave your details in the podcast. If people want to contact you, follow you on Instagram, it'll be on Gazing, right?
Gazing Red2Blue, so please do leave it and it'll be great. And you and I have spoken. My view is there's 8 billion people in the world who could benefit from Red2Blue, so there's a long way to go, but we've started well. And if we can get really great coaches like yourself and people who already understand the concept and the framework and the context with which it's being applied, great teachers, great coaches, we'll get to athletes, we'll get to young people, and we'll get generally to people. So make a big difference. So thank you for the invitation, Joe.
No, thank you for your time. Cheers, Martin. Very good.